There is no question that Carter will be remembered as an accomplished humanitarian. Both his political legacy is more complicated, though. Carter's presidency was marred by the energy and hostage crisis. So joining us now is Professor of Political Science from Marquette University, Julia Azari. And thank you very much, Professor Azari, for joining us. You are, as we know, President Carter was a one-term president, but much of his legacy clouded by the hostage crisis. What did he do right while in office?
That's a great question. I think Carter's legacy is so complicated because he came into office, I think, in this context of being the first president elected after Watergate, and he had this really different vision about what the presidency could be and that it could be a little bit closer to the people, kind of strip back some of that pomp and circumstance. And it wasn't really entirely correct. But I think that looking back on Carter's presidency, you see people kind of saying, oh, he had some ideas that he tried that just really met with a lot of political resistance. And one of those had to do with thinking about the environment and thinking differently about how Americans use energy and interact with the broader environment. And that has had long-lasting repercussions, and a lot of people have looked back at that. I think also some of these ideas that he had about kind of stripping back the pomp and circumstance of the presidency, those ideas keep kind of bubbling up and remain, I think, really unresolved in our politics. But I think that there were certainly some things that Carter tried that weren't successful, some things he did right, and some ways in which his approach to the presidency simply didn't meet the moment.
He was a young man when he left the Oval in his early 50s. That is young for a president of the United States. How did he look to reinvent his legacy over the past 40 years? Because he really defined a new path for the post-presidential era.
Yeah, I think the word that we'll probably hear a lot today is humanitarian. And I think there were kind of a couple major strains to this. There was his work with Habitat for Humanity. There was his work globally in public health and the working to eradicate the guinea worm, and also work that the Carter Center did on democracy and election watching that I think builds on some of these prior commitments that came out in different ways that he brought to his American presidency. But he was really someone who used the platform of having been a former president and the things that that brings to kind of further serve these public ends and really be kind of committed and on the ground.
Hey, Julia, this is Andrew here in our Washington, D.C. studio. Charles and Haley are going to remain silent as that motorcade makes its way into the National Cathedral. But I'm interested, why was Carter so much more respected post-presidency than he was in the White House? What were some of the defining moments of his life that you think will be memorialized this morning?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there will be a lot of talk about his public service post presidency, and not a lot about maybe about his 4 years in the White House, or kind of revisiting that legacy through the lens of many decades removed. Um, the question about why he was such a kind of better post president than president is a really interesting one, and I think actually brings us to maybe a little bit of a disturbing conclusion. I remember growing up and hearing about President Carter and kind of what he left behind. And the thing that you always heard was he was, just such a good person, Sunday school teacher, and brought that energy to his post-presidency life and service, but that wasn't very compatible with the demands of the presidency. And I think that's something that maybe as Americans we should sit with a little bit and think about whether that's true, and if so, why. I think a lot of it had to do with the dynamics in his own party as well. Carter came in with this kind of idea, I'm going to reform, I'm going to clean house, we're going to stop these wasteful spending projects. And it turned out members of Congress in his own party liked those projects in their districts. And he wasn't really a national party politics person. And I think that did affect his presidency. So there's some very kind of mechanical, institutional reasons why that's true. But I really think there's a very thorny question at the heart of that, of Carter's complicated legacy, about whether it really, you can't be a good president and a Sunday school teacher. I think that's really something to ponder.
Yeah, We are seeing images right now, what looks like members of the Carter family making their way into the cathedral. And Julia, I am interested to know, so much focus has been on those years post the White House for Jimmy Carter. What sort of legacy and roadmap has he provided to presidents who are in a similar situation after they leave office, or really is everyone kind of blaze their own trail? Do you think that Jimmy Carter was a little bit of an example for how others have acted after leaving the most important job in the world?
I think we've seen a little bit of that. I mean, I think certainly post-presidents have this kind of pressure to start foundations, pick some causes, do some humanitarian work, and we have certainly seen that. We've seen Bill Clinton and the late George H.W. Bush work together on some humanitarian projects and fundraising. We've seen Barack Obama sort of sketch out a place for himself in public life. I think Obama has been a little bit distinct in that he's remained a bit more active in party politics than we might have expected. So I think everyone's a little bit different. I do think that age is a big part of the story. Carter was, as someone pointed out, quite young when he left office. Obama as well. That has, not been the case for some more recent presidents, and it wasn't the case really necessarily before that. So I think Carter has certainly set a model. I don't know if we'll see very many people who are as humble or as devoted to public service as Carter has been. I think one of the previous guests was kind of talking about Carter being a very hands-on person with his work in Habitat for Humanity and being present. And that was my experience with the president as well. I was doing some research at the Carter Library in 2006, and it was around the time of the year when the interns would be showing up for the year. And I met President Carter and Mrs. Carter as they were just kind of strolling around the Carter Center grounds, just kind of hanging out. And you really got that sense of involvement and humility from them.
All right, Julia, thank you. We're going to be back after a short break to continue our coverage of Jimmy Carter's memorial services this morning in Washington, D.C.